Let's have those drawings of the mechanism, shall we, old chap?
This is Exhibit 3, my lord.
Yeah. We'll have them on the easel, I think.
Brigadier, would you explain to the jury why the gun didn't fire?
Simple. It couldn't.
What?
The gun was never designed to be fired. Look, when you press the trigger, the hammer is released and strikes the percussion cap. Bang! It's exactly the same principle as a child's cap pistol. Now, what should happen is that the flash from the percussion cap goes down an aperture in the nipple and ignites the powder in the barrel. Powder burns, gases build up against the pressure of the wad in the barrel until they're strong enough to blow the wad and the bullet out of the business end of the gun. Understand?
But, Brigadier, you still haven't explained why the gun didn't fire.
I'm coming to that, my lord. Now, in both these guns, the aperture to the chamber was sealed off. The flash from the percussion cap could not ignite the powder in the chamber. QED, the guns couldn't fire.
All the same it did, Brigadier. It had to, otherwise Mr. Matson didn't have an act with which to entertain his public.
I've studied reports of the act, and in my opinion the illusion could only have been worked one way.
How was that?
Before going on stage, Matson must have put a small quantity of black powder in the base of the ramrod casing. This is a diagram showing, in a very formalised way, of course, the way Matson's guns were doctored. As you will see, the aperture of the percussion cap nipple bypasses the chamber and goes right through to the interior of the ramrod housing.
And what would the effect of that be?
A bloody great bang as the powder in the ramrod housing was ignited, some black smoke, and that's all. Unless, of course, he'd replace the ramrod in the housing, but obviously he wouldn't do that.
And Matson himself would have a second silver bullet somewhere about his person, which he would then produce from his mouth.
Precisely. I understand the bullets were marked by the audience before being inserted in the gun. Now, it's a bit difficult to mark a round bullet unless you do it with an X. So he would have been quite safe to have the second bullet already marked, which he could then show to the audience.
This is all very interesting, Brigadier. I can understand how the illusion was done, but you still haven't explained how Matson was killed. Did something go wrong?
Yes, my lord.
And what was that, Brigadier?
Well, Norman Matson may have been a great showman, but he was a rotten armourer.
In what way?
Well, as you'll appreciate, once the act was over, Matson had to unload the wad, the powder, and the bullet. He'd do this, I imagine, in the secrecy of his dressing room.
How would he unload the gun?
Well, he should have unloaded it in the way you always unload muzzle loaders, and that is by means of what is called a worm screw. A worm screw, it's a kind of worm which is fitted to the top of the ramrod. Now, here we are. I've got one already prepared for you. There you are. That's the worm screw, you see? It's a sort of screw which enables you to draw out the charge.
But in your opinion, Mr. Matson did not use a worm.
Nah. This is, of course, only my opinion, but I suspect that he didn't use the proper equipment for the job because the worm would have scratched the bullet already in the barrel, and he needed perfectly matched marked bullets. It was a false economy. He ought to have used fresh bullets at every performance.
Is there any other way in which you could unload this gun, Brigadier?
There is, but I wouldn't recommend it.
And what way is that?
To unscrew the breech plug, which lies at the base of the barrel. There we are. That's the breech plug, that black thing there. He could have emptied out the powder and the bullet then.
You say you wouldn't recommend this method of unloading the gun, Brigadier. Why not?
Because no one but a fully qualified gunsmith should ever remove a breech plug. That's the cause of a lot of accidents. Amateurs messing about with things they don't understand.
What effect would the constant removing and replacing of the breech plug during the performance have?
It killed him. Pass me the other gun, will you, old chap?
This is Exhibit 4, my lord.
Come along, man, come along. My goodness me, thank you very much. Now, this, in fact, is the gun that killed Matson. It's absolutely identical with the first gun. The aperture to the chamber has been sealed off, and an aperture made right through to the base of the ramrod casing. He would have used it exactly the same way as the other, loaded it with the marked bullet. There we are, tamping down the marked bullet, and the wad. There we are, having previously placed a small charge of powder in the ramrod housing. Sandbox ready. Good. Percussion cap in position. Draw back the hammer. Aim into the sandbox. And fire.
Well, that was not the percussion cap.
No, my lord. The gun fired. As it must have done on the night Matson was killed.
Yes, but Brigadier, how did it fire?
Simple. With the constant removal and replacing of the breech plug, the threads of the plug became warm. So, the flash from the powder igniting in the ramrod housing was able to travel upwards through the gaps around the plug and ignite the powder in the chamber. Result, a hole the size of an egg through Matson's chest.
Brigadier, how many times did you test this gun?
35 times.
Did it fire every time?
No, sir, it did not.
How many times did it fire?
12 times. I found it depended on the type of powder used.
Would you explain, please?
Certainly. If you use a coarse-grained powder, the gun is absolutely safe. That is to say, the powder in the ramrod housing does not ignite the powder in the chamber. But if a fine powder is used, grains of it can get into the threads of the plug, thereby acting as a fuse to the powder in the chamber.
Did Matson use a fine-grained powder?
Apparently he'd used both fairly indiscriminately. If he'd taken the trouble to consult a decent gunsmith, he'd still be alive today.
My Lord, I must object to the witness making a series of assumptions and thereby usurping the function of the jury.
Yes, Brigadier, that is a matter for the jury to decide.
As you wish.
Thank you, Brigadier. No more questions.
I have some questions, Brigadier.
What? Oh. Very well.
Now, if I understand it correctly, Brigadier, Matson had sealed off the real barrel and was using the ramrod housing as a second barrel.
Yes.
Now, would anyone firing the gun realise that what had gone off was merely a charge of gunpowder in the ramrod housing and not the real charge?
An expert would. But not many people have ever used a muzzle loader. And in any case, the average chap's knowledge of guns is derived solely from John Wayne films.
Quite. But let us consider the case of someone who was taking part in the act regularly, Mrs. Matson, in fact. Now, she was required to remove the ramrod on each occasion.
Yes.
Now, could it have been possible for some specks of gunpowder to have stuck to the ramrod as it was withdrawn from its casing?
Possibly. Hard to say.
Let me put the question another way, Brigadier. Could you say definitely that some gunpowder could not have stuck to the ramrod?
No, of course I can't.
And if some gunpowder had stuck to the ramrod, would it have been noticeable to someone using the gun? Could they have seen the black specks on the ramrod?
Yes, I suppose so.
And in your opinion, Brigadier, would this have been sufficient to have given the game away to someone with any knowledge of guns? Could they have guessed how the illusion was done?
That's a damn silly thing to ask me. How am I supposed to answer a
Mr.
hypothetical...
Dealey, I don't see how the witness can answer that question.
I shall rephrase the question, my lord. Brigadier, if you had seen black specks of gunpowder sticking to that ramrod, would you have guessed what was going on?
Yes.
Would any gun expert?
Anyone with a ha'porth of intelligence, yes.
Brigadier, do you know any women knowledgeable about guns? Knowledgeable enough to have come to the same conclusions that you have come to?
Quite a few.
Thank you, Brigadier.
Brigadier, I won't keep you much longer.
Thank you.
Just one more question, in fact. Without examining the guns, with only the act itself to go on, would you have known how the illusion was achieved?
You mean, had I been in the audience?
Yes, having watched the act a dozen times or more.
Hard to say. Possibly not.
Thank you, Brigadier. That is all.
You may stand down, Brigadier.
Thank you, my lord.
That concludes the case for the defence, my lord.
Yeah.
Then I will adjourn the court here before hearing the closing speeches.
All stand.